I sit in the courtroom watching my 9-year-old daughter Emma walk toward the judge with her tablet clutched in both hands. Across the aisle, my parents and my sister Brooke wear smug expressions that make my stomach turn. For the past 2 hours, they've been trying to convince Judge Morrison that I should be evicted from the home I bought 5 years ago so Brooke can own her first property. The judge leans forward as Emma approaches the bench. My heart pounds. Emma looks at the judge and asks if she can show her something Daddy doesn't know about. The judge nods, curiosity evident on her face. Emma holds up her tablet and presses play. The courtroom falls silent as a video begins. 6 months before that courtroom moment, my life felt stable for the first time since losing my wife Julie to cancer 3 years earlier. I'm Darian, 32 years old, and I work as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant about 20 minutes from our home in suburban Ohio. Emma and I live in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house that Julie and I bought together 5 years ago, back when we thought we'd have a lifetime to fill it with memories. Instead, cancer stole Julie from us when Emma was only 6 years old. The house means everything to us. Julie chose the soft yellow paint in the kitchen because she said it felt like sunshine even on cloudy days. She planted the garden out back with roses and daisies that still bloom every spring. Emma took her first steps right there in our living room, and sometimes I swear I can still hear Julie's delighted laughter echoing off the walls. This house isn't just a building, it's the last place where our family of 3 existed together. My relationship with my parents, Frank and Linda, had always been complicated. I'm the older child, the responsible one who did everything right. Got good grades, went to college, landed a solid career, married a wonderful woman. Meanwhile, my younger sister Brooke, now 28, always seemed to drift through life without much direction. She works as a retail manager at a department store downtown. Decent job, but nothing she's passionate about. She's been through a string of apartments over the years, never quite managing to save money or settle down. I helped my parents financially more times than I can count. When their car broke down 4 years ago, I paid for the repairs. When they needed a new furnace, I contributed $3,000. I even bailed Brooke out of credit card debt twice, once for $2,500 and another time for $1,800. That's what family does, right? You help each other. That late Saturday afternoon in early spring, when my parents showed up unannounced, I should have known something was wrong. Frank and Linda rarely visited without calling first. Emma was at a friend's house for a sleepover, so it was just the 3 of us sitting in my living room. Dad cleared his throat multiple times. A nervous habit I recognized from childhood. Mom twisted her hands in her lap, not meeting my eyes. Finally, Frank spoke. He explained that Brooke was turning 29 soon and was feeling like a failure because she still rented an apartment. Linda added that Brooke was dealing with depression, that therapy wasn't helping much, and that she desperately needed something to feel proud of. Then came the ask. Would I consider selling them my house at a discount so they could gift it to Brooke? It would give her the pride of home ownership and maybe pull her out of her depression. I sat there stunned, barely able to process what I was hearing. Sell my house? The home I shared with Julie? The place where Emma's entire childhood exists? I explained as calmly as I could that this was Emma's home, full of memories of her mother. I couldn't just sell it, especially not at a discount. This wasn't about money or property values. This was about preserving the last tangible connection Emma had to her mom. My father's face hardened. His voice turned cold in a way I'd never heard before. He said I was being selfish. He reminded me that they'd paid for my college education, implying I owed them. My mother chimed in, saying Brooke needed this more than I did, that I'm a man and would be fine anywhere. The argument escalated quickly. I stood firm, and they left angry, slamming the door behind them. I spent that evening feeling shaken, but I figured they'd cool down and we'd work through it like families do. The next day, a Sunday, I received a certified letter. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a legal notice stating that my parents were claiming an ownership stake in my house. According to the letter, they were asserting they'd provided the down payment as a loan, not a gift, and that I'd defaulted on repayment terms. I stared at the words, completely confused. My parents had given Julie and me $8,000 as a wedding gift 7 years ago. We'd used it toward the down payment on this house. There was never any mention of repayment. The gift came with a card that explicitly said, "For your new life together." I still had that card in a box of wedding memories. I immediately called my parents, hoping this was some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Frank answered on the third ring. His voice was icy. He confirmed they'd filed legal paperwork claiming the $8,000 was a loan. When I protested that it was a wedding gift, he said they had documentation proving otherwise. He told me I'd signed papers. I racked my brain but couldn't remember signing any loan documents. Just thank you cards and the usual wedding paperwork. Frank's tone made it clear this conversation was over. He hung up, panic rising. I tore through my filing cabinet looking for anything related to that wedding gift. After an hour of searching, I found it buried in a folder of wedding documents. A paper titled Family Financial Agreement. The language was deliberately vague, full of terms like financial assistance and future consideration. I vaguely remembered my father asking me to sign it at the rehearsal dinner. He'd said it was for tax purposes, something about documenting gifts over a certain amount. I'd been so distracted with wedding preparations that I'd just signed it without reading carefully. Looking at it now with clear eyes, I realized how easily it could be interpreted as a loan agreement. My father, who'd worked in banking for 30 years before retiring, knew exactly what he was doing. He'd laid this trap 7 years ago, probably thinking he'd never need to spring it. But now, with Brooke's supposed depression and their desire to give her a house, they'd decided to activate their leverage. I felt physically sick. My own parents had planned this betrayal 7 years in advance. They'd smiled at my wedding, congratulated Julie and me, handed us that card about our new life together, all while holding a legal document that would let them claim the money was a loan whenever it suited them. That night, after Emma came home from her sleepover full of stories about pillow fights and movies, I tucked her into bed and then sat alone in the kitchen. I looked at the yellow walls Julie had loved and wondered how I was going to fight my own parents in court. 2 weeks after receiving that legal notice, I sat across from Marcus Boyd, a family law attorney whose office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. Marcus was in his mid-40s with graying hair and a kind but serious demeanor. He reviewed the documents I'd brought with methodical care, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Finally, he looked up and delivered the bad news. The family financial agreement was legally ambiguous, which meant a court could interpret it either way. Combined with my parents' sworn testimony that they'd intended it as a loan, I had a real problem. They were claiming the $8,000 plus 18% interest compounded annually over 7 years, which according to their calculation came to over $17,000. Since I obviously couldn't pay that amount immediately, they were seeking an ownership percentage in the house equivalent to their claimed stake. Marcus quoted me a retainer fee of $15,000 for full representation through trial. I felt my stomach drop. Julie's medical bills had depleted our savings. We'd had insurance, but the copays, experimental treatments not covered, and all the little expenses that pile up during a cancer fight had left us with almost nothing. I had maybe $4,000 in savings. That was supposed to be Emma's emergency fund. Marcus offered a payment plan, but even that would be a stretch on my salary. And he warned the case could drag on for months, racking up additional fees along the way. While I struggled with the financial reality of mounting a legal defense, things got worse. Brooke launched a social media campaign. She posted in several community Facebook groups, carefully crafting her narrative. She painted herself as the struggling younger sister desperate for stability while her successful older brother refused to help family. She never mentioned the lawsuit directly, just framed it as me being unwilling to sell her the house even though she needed it so badly. The posts included photos of Brooke crying, talking about her depression and feelings of worthlessness. Community members who didn't know the full story started commenting. I saw words like selfish and heartless attached to my name. Some people I'd considered friendly acquaintances joined the pile-on, saying family should help family. Emma saw some of the comments when she was at her friend Taylor's house. Taylor's mom had the Facebook group open on her tablet, and Emma glimpsed the posts about me before Taylor's mom realized and closed the screen. Emma came home that afternoon with red eyes, asking why people were saying mean things about me online. I held her close and tried to explain that sometimes people don't understand the whole situation, that it was complicated grown-up stuff. But I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes. The next week, Kids at school started treating her differently. A few were outright mean, parroting things they'd heard their parents say. Others just avoided her, not wanting to be associated with the family drama. Then my work situation got complicated. My supervisor, a decent man named Gary, called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable as he explained that HR had received an anonymous letter claiming I was financially unstable and dealing with a family crisis that was affecting my judgment. HR needed me to confirm that nothing was impacting my work performance. I had to disclose the lawsuit. Gary assured me my job was safe and that he had no concerns about my work, but I felt humiliated. The idea that my family problems were now part of my employment record made me feel exposed and vulnerable in a way I'd never experienced. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Marcus called with devastating news. My parents had filed an additional motion claiming that Emma's welfare was at risk due to the dispute over living arrangements. They were requesting temporary custody of Emma until the housing situation was resolved. I couldn't breathe, as Marcus explained. They'd submitted affidavits claiming I was too stressed to parent properly, that the house being disputed property made it an unstable environment for a child. Brooke had provided a sworn statement claiming she'd witnessed me drinking heavily and yelling at Emma. Complete lies. I barely drank at all. Maybe a beer once a month. And I'd never raised my voice to Emma in anger. But there it was, documented in legal filings. The judge had granted a temporary hearing to assess Emma's situation. Social services would interview Emma and inspect our home within 1 week. I sat in Marcus's office feeling like the walls were closing in. This wasn't just about the house anymore. My parents were willing to take my daughter to pressure me into surrendering. They were using Emma as a weapon. That night, after Emma went to bed, I broke down completely. I sat on the edge of my bed, in the room I'd shared with Julie, and cried for the first time since her funeral. I felt utterly trapped. If I fought, my parents escalated. If I surrendered the house, I lost Julie's memory and Emma's stability and looked like a coward who gave up under pressure. The next evening, Emma found me at the kitchen table staring at bills and legal documents. She climbed into my lap, something she didn't do as much now that she was getting older. She asked quietly if Grandma and Grandpa were being mean to me. I tried to shield her from the details, just said there was a disagreement about the house. Emma got very quiet, that thoughtful look she sometimes got when processing something complicated. Then she said something that surprised me. She said she wanted to help me. I hugged her tight and told her that just being there helped, that I loved her more than anything. But inside, I wondered how a 9-year-old could possibly help against the kind of legal and emotional warfare my parents were waging. The social services inspection happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Patricia Stevens arrived exactly on time. A woman in her 50s, with short gray hair, and a professional, but not unkind demeanor. She explained the process calmly, checked every room, inspected safety features, like smoke detectors, and the locks on cabinets containing cleaning supplies. She interviewed Emma separately in Emma's bedroom while I waited nervously in the kitchen. 20 minutes felt like hours. When they emerged, Emma looked fine, maybe a little tired from answering questions, but not distressed. Patricia told me she'd submit her report to the court, and left without revealing her conclusions. 2 days later, Marcus called with good news. Patricia's report was positive. She'd found no concerns about Emma's welfare, no signs of neglect or instability, and she'd recommended no change in custody. The hearing scheduled for the following week should be just a formality. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I took Emma out for ice cream at her favorite place, a little shop called Sweet Dreams that served enormous sundaes. She got chocolate with gummy bears and whipped cream, and I got vanilla with caramel. We sat outside at a picnic table, and for half an hour, life felt almost normal. But that relief lasted less than 24 hours. The day before the custody hearing, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. A woman's voice, nervous and speaking quickly, identified herself as Stephanie. She claimed to be a friend of Brooke's and said I needed to know what they were planning. Stephanie explained that Brooke had been recording manipulated evidence. She'd staged videos of my house made to look ransacked. She'd filmed herself in my home, which she'd accessed using a key from when she'd house-sit for me last year, placing empty beer bottles around different rooms and taking photos. She'd even created fake text messages using photo editing software. Stephanie said Brooke planned to present all of this at the custody hearing to make it look like I was an alcoholic living in chaos. Before I could ask more questions or get Stephanie's contact information to have her testify, she said she had to go and hung up. The line went dead. I immediately called Marcus and told him everything. He was concerned, but explained that without Stephanie willing to testify or provide her identity, we couldn't do much preemptively. He advised me to be prepared for an ambush at the hearing and to stay calm no matter what they presented. I spent that night trying to find Stephanie. I searched social media for friends of Brooke, called the number back repeatedly with no answer. I felt helpless, knowing an attack was coming but unable to defend against it. The morning of the custody hearing, Emma and I arrived at the courthouse early. She wore her best dress, navy blue with white flowers, and held my hand tightly as we walked through the metal detectors. My parents and Brooke were already there, clustered with a man I didn't recognize who turned out to be their new attorney, Garrett Thompson. He was younger than Marcus, maybe 35, with slicked-back hair and an aggressive posture. We filed into the courtroom. Judge Morrison, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, presided. Patricia Stevens gave her report first, clearly stating she'd found no welfare concerns and recommended Emma remain with me. I started to hope this would be quick and painless. Then Garrett stood up. He announced they had new evidence that had come to light just days ago. My stomach dropped. He pulled out his phone and connected it to the courtroom's display screen. The videos appeared, showing my living room in disarray. Books scattered across the floor. Papers strewn everywhere. Dishes piled in the sink. In the corner of one shot, clearly visible, were 3 empty beer bottles. Another video showed my bedroom with clothes everywhere and more bottles on the nightstand. The footage looked recent based on the calendar visible in one shot showing this month. Brooke took the stand and testified that she'd visited unannounced 3 days ago because she was concerned about her niece. She claimed she'd been horrified by the conditions, that I'd appeared intoxicated, and that Emma had looked neglected and scared. Then Garrett presented screenshots of text messages allegedly from my phone. Messages saying things like, "I can't handle this anymore," and "Sometimes I just want to disappear." They showed my phone number as the sender. I sat there stunned. The videos were completely fabricated. My house looked nothing like that. And I'd never sent those text messages. But they looked convincing. The phone number was correct. The video quality was good enough that you couldn't easily tell it had been staged. Judge Morrison looked at me with concern and asked me to respond to these allegations. I stood up, my voice shaking slightly, and denied everything. I said the videos were staged, the house didn't look like that, and I hadn't sent those messages. Marcus argued that the videos were manipulated, but without a technical expert to analyze them, we couldn't prove it in the moment. He pointed out that my house currently looked nothing like the videos, but Garrett countered that I'd obviously cleaned up knowing this hearing was coming. Judge Morrison looked skeptical of both sides. The hearing was supposed to be quick, but now it stretched into hours as both sides argued. I noticed Emma sitting very still, watching everything with intense focus. At one point, she leaned over and whispered to me that Aunt Brooke was lying. I squeezed her hand and whispered back that I knew. Then Emma said something that surprised me. She said she could prove it. I asked what she meant. But before she could explain, the judge called a 15-minute recess to review the evidence in her chambers. During the recess, Marcus pulled me aside into the hallway. His expression was grave. Garrett had approached him with a settlement offer. If I surrendered the house immediately and signed over the deed to my parents, they would drop all claims, including the custody motion. Everything would go away. I felt rage building inside me. They were literally trying to blackmail me with my own daughter. Marcus warned that Judge Morrison seemed swayed by the videos, that she might actually order temporary custody pending a full investigation. I refused the settlement. I told Marcus I wouldn't give them Julie's house, wouldn't let them win through manipulation and lies. Emma tugged at my sleeve. She said she needed to tell me something important. Before she could explain, the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. Judge Morrison took her seat and began delivering what sounded like a preliminary ruling. She said that while she had concerns about both sides' credibility, the video evidence was troubling enough that she needed to err on the side of child safety. She announced she was granting temporary custody to Frank and Linda for 30 days pending a full investigation. My world collapsed in that moment. I was about to lose Emma. About to watch my parents walk out of the courthouse with my daughter, while they investigated allegations my sister had fabricated. Then Emma stood up. She didn't ask permission or wait for a pause in proceedings. She simply stood and said in a clear, loud voice, "Your Honor, can I show you something Daddy doesn't know about?" Every head in the courtroom turned toward Emma. Judge Morrison looked surprised by the interruption, but also intrigued. I was completely confused. Had no idea what Emma was talking about. She clutched her tablet, the one she used for schoolwork and games, against her chest. I whispered to Emma, asking what she was doing, but she kept her eyes locked on the judge. Judge Morrison paused, considered for a moment, then asked Emma to approach the bench. Emma walked forward with surprising confidence for a 9-year-old in a courtroom full of adults locked in bitter conflict. The judge leaned forward and asked Emma kindly what she wanted to show her. Emma's voice was steady as she explained that she had something Daddy didn't know she had. Something important, she began her explanation. She said that months ago, after Grandma and Grandpa had visited and argued with Daddy, she'd gotten worried. She'd noticed Aunt Brooke acting strange during family gatherings, saying nice things but with a weird look in her eyes. So Emma had started paying attention, being watchful in the way kids sometimes are when they sense something's wrong in the adult world. Judge Morrison asked what Emma had recorded. Emma pulled up a video file dated 4 months earlier. She explained that she'd been filming herself working on an art project for school at Grandma and Grandpa's house during a Sunday dinner. She'd propped her tablet on the kitchen counter to record herself painting. When she finished the project, she forgot to stop the recording. The tablet had kept running for another 40 minutes, capturing audio from the dining room where Brooke, Frank, and Linda were talking. Emma pressed play. The courtroom went absolutely silent. At first, we heard just the ambient sounds of a house, distant clattering of dishes. Then voices became clear. Brooke's voice came through first, saying, "Once I get the house, I'm selling it immediately. I don't want to live there, I want the money." Linda's voice responded, "We know, dear. That's the plan. We split the profits 3 ways." Frank's voice, unmistakable, said, "We need to be patient. The loan document will hold up in court." I made sure the language was vague enough 7 years ago. Brooke asked, "But what if he fights it? What if Darian won't just give up?" Frank's response sent chills through the courtroom. "Then we go for custody. Threaten to take Emma. He'll cave if we threaten his daughter. He's weak that way." Too emotional. The audio continued for another minute, discussing logistics, talking about how they'd split the roughly $700,000 they'd get from selling my house. They laughed about how clever their long-term planning had been. When the audio ended, the courtroom remained silent. I sat frozen, unable to process what I just heard. My own parents, my sister, casually discussing how to manipulate and destroy me, planning to use Emma as a threat, calling me weak for loving my daughter. Judge Morrison's expression had transformed from judicial neutrality to barely contained anger. She looked at Frank and Linda with cold fury. Frank jumped up, sputtering that the audio was taken out of context, that they were just discussing hypotheticals. Linda tried to claim they were playing devil's advocate, exploring different scenarios. Judge Morrison told them sharply to sit down and be quiet. She asked Emma if there was more. Emma nodded and pulled up another video file. This one was dated 3 weeks ago. Emma explained that she'd become suspicious after overhearing a phone call where Aunt Brooke was whispering angrily about something. When Brooke had come to visit while I was at work, Emma had secretly set her tablet to record. She'd positioned it on the bookshelf where it looked like it was just charging. But the camera was active. She pressed play on this video. The footage showed Brooke entering my house with a key. She was talking on her phone, saying, "I'm here now. He's at work, and the kids at school. Nobody's home." The video showed Brooke systematically messing up my living room. She pulled books off shelves, scattered papers across the floor, moved furniture slightly. She placed empty beer bottles that she'd brought with her into various visible locations. She took photos and video with her phone from multiple angles. Into her phone, she said, "This is perfect. He'll look like a drunk mess living in chaos." Then, methodically, Brooke cleaned everything up. She put books back on shelves, collected the bottles, repositioned furniture exactly as it had been. The video showed her checking to make sure everything looked untouched before leaving. Emma's voice explained over the footage that she'd come home early from school that day because she felt sick. The school had called me, but I'd been in a meeting and missed it, so they'd sent her home in a taxi with a note. Aunt Brooke hadn't known Emma was in her bedroom the whole time. The courtroom erupted. Garrett looked absolutely blindsided. Clearly, his clients had not informed him they'd fabricated evidence. Marcus was on his feet, objecting to basically everything my family had presented. Brooke had gone pale as snow, but Emma wasn't finished. She pulled up a text message thread. She explained that she used her tablet to text her friends, and that it was synced to our family phone plan with its own number. 3 weeks ago, she'd received strange texts from an unknown number. The text said things like, "I can't handle this anymore and I want to disappear." She showed the screenshots she'd taken of these messages. Emma said she'd been confused and shown them to me at the time. But when I'd checked my phone, there was nothing there. Marcus immediately recognized that these were the exact texts Garrett had presented as evidence, supposedly from my phone to Emma. Someone had spoofed my phone number and sent messages to Emma's tablet, not realizing her tablet number was different from my actual phone. Judge Morrison demanded the original phone showing these texts. When Garrett produced it, the number matched my phone, but the recipient number was Emma's tablet, not any other device. The fabrication was obvious. Emma had one more video. This one from 2 days ago. She'd gone to her grandparents' house after school for the afternoon, while I worked late. She'd left her tablet recording in the guest room while using the bathroom. The video captured a conversation between Brooke and a man Emma didn't recognize. The footage showed Brooke handing the man a stack of cash. The man said, "The text message spoofing is completely untraceable. Don't worry about it." Brooke responded, "Good, because by the time anyone figures out what we've done, we'll have the house sold and the money split." Judge Morrison's face was a mask of fury. She demanded an explanation from Frank, Linda, and Brooke. Frank tried to claim the videos were edited, that Emma was too young to have orchestrated this, that we'd manipulated her. The judge cut him off. She ordered the bailiff to secure Emma's tablet as evidence for criminal investigation. She asked Marcus to file immediate motions, which he did right there, moving to dismiss all claims against me. Judge Morrison granted it on the spot. All custody claims dismissed. The ownership dispute dismissed. She went further, revoking her temporary custody order before it could even take effect, and ordering an investigation into potential perjury and fraud charges against Brooke, Frank, and Linda. Contempt of court charges were filed against Brooke for presenting false testimony and fabricated evidence. I pulled Emma into a fierce hug, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't speak, just held her while my whole body shook with relief and shock. When I finally found words, I whispered, asking how she'd known to record all of this, why she hadn't told me. Emma looked up at me with those wise eyes that sometimes made her seem older than 9. She said she'd wanted to be sure she had enough proof, that she didn't want me to worry even more than I already was. She'd been protecting me the whole time. I thought I was protecting her. Across the courtroom, my parents and Brooke were in chaos. Frank was arguing with the judge, making things worse. Linda sat with her head in her hands. Brooke looked like she might throw up. Garrett, their attorney, approached Marcus. He apologized, said he'd been lied to by his clients, and was withdrawing from the case immediately. He looked disgusted. Judge Morrison explained that while the custody and ownership claims were dismissed, the original loan dispute would require separate civil proceedings. But Marcus was confident we'd win that too, especially now with evidence of their fraudulent intent. The judge set a date for a follow-up hearing on potential criminal charges and told my family they were not to leave the state. As we left the courtroom, I held Emma's hand tightly. I felt relief flooding through me, but it was mixed with horror at what my family had tried to do. Emma had saved us. My 9-year-old daughter had been braver and smarter than I ever could have been. But as we reached the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed with an email. I glanced at it, and my relief evaporated. The email was from my mortgage company with a subject line reading "Foreclosure Notice, Immediate Action Required." I opened it with shaking hands. Someone had reported me as 30 days delinquent on my mortgage payments. I wasn't behind at all, but an investigation had been triggered. Worse, my bank account had been flagged for suspicious activity and frozen pending a fraud investigation. I realized with sinking dread that my parents had filed false reports with both my bank and mortgage company. One problem was solved, but a new, potentially catastrophic crisis had just emerged. Without access to my bank account, I couldn't pay my mortgage even though I had the money. And with a foreclosure notice already filed, missing the payment due in 3 days could start a process I couldn't stop. Emma looked up at me and asked if everything was okay. I forced a smile and said everything was fine, but inside, panic was rising again. The next 72 hours were a waking nightmare. My bank account remained frozen while they investigated the fraud reports my parents had filed. They'd claimed I'd forged their signatures on various documents, which triggered an automatic freeze while the bank conducted due diligence. Despite Marcus immediately sending evidence that the fraud reports were themselves fraudulent, the bank said their investigation process took a minimum of 1 week. I had $300 in cash in my wallet. That was it. Everything else was locked in my inaccessible account. My mortgage payment of $2,100 was due in 48 hours. If I missed it, with a foreclosure notice already filed, the consequences could be devastating. Marcus filed emergency motions trying to unfreeze my account, but court dates were backed up. The earliest hearing he could get was 5 days away. He tried calling bank executives, but they hid behind corporate policy. Without completing their investigation, they couldn't release my funds. I swallowed my pride and started calling friends to borrow money. Jeremy, a guy I'd known since college, listened sympathetically but said his wife didn't want them getting involved in family drama. Another friend, Brian, said they were tight on cash themselves. A third, Tyler, offered $200, but said that was all he could spare. I realized the social media campaign had done more damage than I'd thought. People were uncomfortable, uncertain about the truth, and unwilling to risk their own money on what looked from the outside like a messy family situation. On the second day of this crisis, I received a certified letter delivered to my workplace. Opening it, I found a civil lawsuit. Brooke was suing me for defamation and emotional distress, claiming Emma's videos were obtained illegally and violated her privacy. She sought $50,000 in damages. It was obviously frivolous given that she'd just been caught fabricating evidence in court, but it required a legal response. Marcus groaned when I called him. Defending even a baseless lawsuit would cost thousands more in legal fees that I didn't have. That same afternoon, Emma's school called. The principal, Miss Crawford, needed to see me immediately. My heart sank as I left work early and drove to the elementary school with Emma beside me. Miss Crawford's office was warm and decorated with children's artwork, but her expression was troubled. She explained that Linda had come to the school the previous day, attempting to check Emma out of class. Linda had claimed she had custody and that I was preventing her from seeing her granddaughter. The school hadn't released Emma, but Linda had caused such a scene that security had been called. Linda had screamed that I was kidnapping Emma, that the courts had given her custody. Other parents had witnessed the whole thing. Miss Crawford needed documentation clarifying the custody situation. I provided copies of Judge Morrison's order confirming I had full custody and that the temporary custody ruling had been revoked before taking effect. Miss Crawford was apologetic but said she had to ban Linda from school property for the safety and security of all students. Emma sat quietly during this conversation, but I saw her hands shaking slightly in her lap. When we got to the car, she asked in a small voice if Grandma was going to take her away. I assured her absolutely not, that the court had said she stays with me, that nobody could take her. But I could see the fear in her eyes. The adults she'd trusted her whole life had turned into threats. That night, I lay awake wondering what this was doing to her psychologically. By the third day, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, facing financial ruin. Even if my bank account was eventually unfrozen, Marcus now owed $12,000 in legal fees. The new frivolous lawsuit would require defense, Probably another 5,000 at minimum. My credit score was tanking from the fraud flags and missed payment notifications. Late fees were already accruing on my mortgage. The house I'd fought so hard to protect was slipping away anyway, not through a courtroom loss but through financial destruction. My parents had figured out they didn't need to win legally. They just needed to make defending myself too expensive to sustain. Emma found me that evening sitting with my head in my hands at the kitchen table. She climbed into the chair next to me and said with surprising maturity that we were going to be okay. She showed me her journal where she'd been writing down everything that had happened, every threat and lie, meticulously documented. She said something that stuck with me. She said bad people don't win forever. Coming from a 9-year-old who'd already lost her mother to cancer and was now watching her family implode, those words carried weight. At 9:30 that night, the doorbell rang. I answered cautiously, looking through the peephole first. A woman I didn't immediately recognize stood on my porch, looking nervous and checking over her shoulder repeatedly. I opened the door with the chain still engaged. She identified herself as Stephanie, the woman who'd called with the warning before the custody hearing. She asked if she could come in, said she had information I needed to know. I let her in, and we sat in the living room while Emma slept upstairs. Stephanie looked exhausted and frightened. She explained that she wasn't just Brooke's friend. She was Brooke's former roommate and had worked under her at the retail store for 2 years. For months, Brooke had bragged about the scheme to get my house. Stephanie had thought it was just talk, angry venting. But then Brooke had started actually doing it, fabricating evidence, and Stephanie realized it was real. She'd tried to warn me with that phone call, but she'd been too scared of retaliation to identify herself. Watching Emma's bravery in court had shamed her into action. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She handed me a flash drive, saying it contained recordings of Brooke admitting to fabricating evidence. There were emails between Brooke and our parents, planning the loan document trap, discussing how to pressure me. Everything was documented, time-stamped, saved. Stephanie revealed more. Frank and Linda had bought a rental property 2 years ago, thinking it would provide retirement income. But the property had been a disaster. Bad tenants, expensive repairs, periods of vacancy. They were deeply in debt now, facing possible bankruptcy. They owed over $120,000 on the rental property that was worth maybe $90,000 in its current condition. They'd seen my house, worth approximately $700,000 in the current market, as their salvation. The plan had been to force me out through the lawsuit, deed the house to Brooke, have her immediately sell it, then split the profits 3 ways. Frank and Linda would use their share to pay off debts and have something left for retirement. Brooke would use her share to open the boutique she'd always dreamed of. They'd never intended for Brooke to actually live in my house. It was always about the money. Stephanie also knew who'd made the false reports to my bank. Brooke had done it herself, using forged documents she'd created. Stephanie had copies of those forged documents because Brooke had carelessly left them in a shared Dropbox folder. Everything was on the flash drive. There was even a recording of Brooke admitting she'd filed a false police report claiming I'd threatened her, though that report apparently hadn't gone anywhere because the police had found it not credible. I stared at the flash drive like it was a winning lottery ticket. This evidence could end everything. Marcus could use it to file criminal charges, to get my bank account unfrozen immediately, to stop the foreclosure process, to countersue for damages. But before I could fully process this victory, Emma's bedroom door opened. She came downstairs saying she didn't feel well. I touched her forehead and immediately felt intense heat. She had a high fever, maybe 103 degrees. I gave her children's fever reducer and waited 30 minutes, but her temperature didn't drop. It climbed to 103.5. I bundled her into the car and drove to the emergency room, Stephanie following in her own car to return to my house for anything we might need. At the hospital, Emma's fever spiked to 104. Doctors examined her and said she was suffering from severe stress-induced illness. Her body was breaking down from anxiety and trauma. The pediatrician explained that children sometimes suppress psychological distress until their bodies physically manifest it. Emma needed to stay overnight for observation and IV fluids. But then came another problem. My insurance information was in my online banking portal, which I couldn't access because my account was frozen. The hospital needed insurance verification for an overnight stay. The admitting clerk was sympathetic but said without insurance confirmation, they'd have to charge me directly. An overnight ER stay would run several $1,000s minimum. I had $270 left in cash. I begged the administrator, explained the situation with my frozen account. I tried calling the bank's emergency line, finally got through after 40 minutes on hold. They said unfreezing my account would still take 48 hours minimum even with the evidence Marcus had sent. The hospital was bound by policy. Without insurance verification or full payment up front, they couldn't admit Emma for overnight observation. They could treat her in the ER, but once her fever stabilized, she'd have to be discharged. Emma's fever hit 104.2. The doctor said at this temperature, there was risk of seizures. She needed to stay and be monitored. But the hospital's hands were tied by administrative policy. I sat in that ER room watching my daughter burn up with fever, a direct result of the stress my family had inflicted on her, and felt something inside me break. Not break down, but break open. All the fear and desperation transformed into pure rage. These people, my own parents and sister, had tried to steal my house. When that didn't work fast enough, they'd tried to take my daughter. When caught, they'd sabotaged my finances. And now my 9-year-old was hospitalized with stress-induced illness, while I couldn't even access my own money to pay for her care. I called Marcus from the hospital hallway. It was nearly midnight, but he answered. I told him to file everything. Criminal charges against all 3 of them. A civil lawsuit for damages. Restraining orders, all of it. Everything we'd been holding back. Every aggressive legal strategy we'd considered too extreme. I wanted it all activated immediately. Marcus tried to counsel patience, said going that hard would be expensive and take years. I cut him off. I said I didn't care about the cost or the time. They'd tried to take my daughter, and now she was hospitalized because of them. I was done playing defense. It was time to destroy them completely. Marcus paused, then said he'd start drafting paperwork first thing in the morning. He'd file for emergency hearings, push for immediate criminal prosecution, pursue maximum damages. I went back to Emma's room. She was sleeping fitfully, IV in her small arm. Stephanie had brought blankets from my house and sat with me through the night. Around 3 in the morning, Emma woke briefly and squeezed my hand. She whispered, "Fight back, Daddy." Those 2 words crystallized everything. My daughter, 9 years old and hospitalized from stress, was telling me to fight. And she was right. I'd spent weeks reacting, defending, trying to minimize damage. Now, it was time to go on offense. Marcus worked through the weekend. By Monday morning, he'd assembled a comprehensive legal offensive that would make my parents and sister regret ever starting this fight. With Stephanie's evidence, everything changed. Marcus got a bank executive on the phone and showed them proof that the fraud reports against me were themselves fraudulent. The forged documents Stephanie had provided proved Brooke had created false paperwork. Within hours, my account was unfrozen through an emergency procedure. I immediately paid Emma's hospital bill, and she was released that afternoon. Her fever finally broken. Monday morning, Marcus filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney. The charges against Brooke included 6 counts: fraud, perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, fabricating evidence, and attempting to interfere with custody. Frank and Linda were charged as co-conspirators with 4 counts each. The DA took the case seriously. White-collar fraud against a family member, especially involving attempts to gain custody of a child through false allegations, wasn't something they could ignore. A detective was assigned to investigate. Stephanie gave her formal statement to police. She provided all her evidence, recordings, emails, documents. She was terrified of retaliation but held firm, saying Emma's courage in court had inspired her to do the right thing. Within 3 days, formal criminal charges were filed. Police executed a search warrant on my parents' home and found even more evidence. Notebooks where they'd planned the scheme, discussing strategy and timelines. Bank statements showing their desperate financial situation. Documentation of the rental property disaster. The picture became clear. Frank and Linda owed $123,000 on their failing rental property. They had over $80,000 in combined credit card debt. They were months away from potential bankruptcy. My house, which they'd helped with just $8,000 7 years ago, was now worth $700,000. They'd seen it as their only way out of financial ruin. On Thursday of that week, Brooke was arrested at work. Police walked into the department store where she managed the clothing section and handcuffed her in front of her employees and customers. She was immediately fired. The local news covered the story. Local woman arrested for elaborate scheme to steal brother's home. The story went viral in our community. The same Facebook groups where Brooke had painted me as heartless now erupted with outrage at her. People who'd condemned me publicly apologized. The narrative flipped completely. My bank, embarrassed by how they'd handled the false fraud reports, offered a settlement of $20,000 for the distress and disruption caused. I accepted and used the money to pay down Marcus's legal fees. The mortgage company removed all late fees, flags, and foreclosure notices from my account. They apologized for not verifying the claims before taking action. My credit score began its slow recovery. Marcus filed aggressive civil lawsuits against all three defendants, seeking $200,000 in damages for emotional distress, defamation, legal fees, and the harm done to Emma. He moved to seize my parents' rental property as security for potential damages, and the judge granted it. The property was placed in receivership, meaning they couldn't sell it or profit from it while the case proceeded. He filed liens against Brooke's assets, her car, her bank accounts, future wages. She tried to hire lawyers, but once attorneys saw the evidence, they declined to take her case. It was unwinnable. My parents tried to represent themselves at first, filing confused motions full of legal errors. Eventually, they found a lawyer willing to take their case, but he was clearly doing damage control, not mounting a real defense. The community response surprised me. My workplace held a collection, and colleagues donated $8,000 to help with expenses. The church Emma and I attended, though we weren't regular members, held a fundraiser that raised another $6,000. People brought meals to our house, offered to help with yard work, expressed shame for having judged me based on Brooke's social media lies. Stephanie became something of a local hero for whistleblowing. The DA's office offered her protection and praised her courage. She and I became genuine friends. She visited regularly, often bringing dinner. Emma adored her and started calling her Aunt Stephanie, a title Stephanie wore with visible pride. Just when it seemed everything was resolving, I got an unexpected call from Garrett, my family's former attorney. He wanted to meet. I was suspicious but curious, so I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop. Garrett looked troubled as he explained why he'd called. Before withdrawing from the case, he'd seen medical records that Linda had shown him. Frank had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He'd been diagnosed 6 months before they'd filed the lawsuit. His prognosis was 6 months to live, maybe less. Linda had shown Garrett the records to explain why they were so desperate, hoping it would justify their actions in his eyes. It hadn't worked on Garrett, but he thought I should know. He said Frank's illness didn't excuse what they'd done, but he felt I deserved the full picture. I sat in that coffee shop processing this information. My father was dying. Part of me felt a surge of sympathy, despite everything. He was still my dad, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework. When I told Emma that night that Grandpa was very sick, she cried. Despite everything, she'd loved her grandfather. She asked if we could visit him. I didn't know how to answer. I called Marcus and asked his advice. He was blunt. Sympathy didn't erase their crimes. Frank's illness didn't justify fraud, perjury, or emotional abuse. He reminded me that Emma had been hospitalized from the stress they'd caused. He said I could forgive later, but right now, I needed justice. I thought about Julie. If she were here, what would she want? I remembered her core philosophy. Protect Emma above everything else. And I realized that dropping charges would send Emma the message that family can abuse you without consequences. That sympathy for someone's circumstances justifies cruelty toward others. The criminal case proceeded. The DA offered a plea deal to avoid trial. All 3 defendants would admit guilt, accept supervised probation, mandatory counseling, and community service. They'd pay restitution of $40,000 total, split between them. In exchange, they'd avoid jail time but have felony convictions on their records. Frank and Linda accepted immediately. They couldn't afford a trial, and Frank was too sick to endure one. Brooke initially refused. She wanted to fight, convinced she could argue that Emma's videos were illegally obtained surveillance that violated her privacy rights. She hired a lawyer on contingency, who filed a motion to suppress all of Emma's recordings as evidence. For a brief, terrifying moment, I worried the whole case could fall apart. If Emma's videos were ruled inadmissible, Brooke might walk away. The suppression hearing was tense. Brooke's lawyer argued that Emma's recordings violated state wiretapping laws, which generally require all parties to consent to being recorded. Marcus countered that the laws had exceptions for recordings made in your own home or in places where you have permission to be, especially when those recordings document criminal activity. Judge Morrison, handling this hearing as well, listened to both sides and then delivered her ruling. Emma's recordings were legal and admissible. She'd been recording in her own home and in her grandparents' home where she had permission to be. People plotting crimes don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. A child protecting herself and her father from family members conspiring to commit fraud isn't illegal surveillance. The motion was denied. Brooke's defense collapsed. In the courthouse hallway afterward, she broke down completely. Between sobs, she apologized. She said she'd been jealous her whole life, that I'd always had everything, that watching me have a career and a family while she struggled had eaten away at her. I looked at my sister, mascara running down her face, and felt an unexpected pity. I said quietly that she could have asked for help. I would have helped her start a business, would have supported her dreams. Instead, she'd tried to destroy us. She had no answer to that. I walked away with Emma's hand in mine. The following week, all three defendants appeared in court and formally pleaded guilty. At sentencing, Frank and Linda received probation due to their age and Frank's terminal illness. Brooke received 1 year supervised probation and 500 hours of community service. All three were ordered to begin making restitution payments immediately. The judge made the restraining orders permanent, 10 years of no contact with Emma or me unless we initiated it. Rather than push the civil case to trial, which could take years, Marcus negotiated a settlement. My parents signed over their rental property to me. After selling it and paying off their mortgage, I netted $185,000. I put $100,000 into a trust fund for Emma's college education. The rest went to paying off remaining legal fees and rebuilding our emergency savings. Brooke agreed to pay $50 per month for 10 years, totaling $6,000. It was a small amount, but Marcus said it was symbolic. For the next decade, every month, Brooke would write a check remembering what she'd done. I'd won. Legally, financially, completely. But victory felt hollow. I'd lost my family. My parents had betrayed me in the worst possible way. My sister had tried to destroy us. Even though we'd survived, something had been irrevocably broken. Emma was in therapy, processing the trauma of being betrayed by her grandparents. She was resilient, but the scars would last. Every night, I tucked her in and promised her that she was safe, that nobody would ever take her from me. The house was ours, free and clear of any claims. The legal nightmare was over. But now came the harder work of healing and rebuilding a life where the people who should have loved us most had become our greatest enemies. 3 months after the court settlement, life began to feel stable again. My finances were recovering steadily. The sale of my parents' rental property had not only cleared all remaining legal fees, but had given Emma's future a solid foundation with that college trust fund. I'd kept $50,000 as an emergency fund, determined never to be that vulnerable again. My workplace promotion to senior engineer came with a $20,000 annual raise. My supervisor had called me into his office and said the company valued integrity, and I demonstrated it under extreme pressure. The raise meant I could start saving for Emma's activities, maybe a family vacation, just breathing room in our budget. Emma's therapy was helping. Her counselor, a kind woman named Dr. Patterson, said Emma showed remarkable resilience but needed ongoing support to process the betrayal. Emma talked openly about her complicated feelings toward her grandparents. She said she still loved them but was angry at what they'd done. Dr. Patterson said that complexity was normal and healthy. One evening, Emma asked if she'd ever see her grandparents again. I'd been dreading this question but answered honestly. Not for a long time. Maybe when she was older, and could make that decision herself. Emma seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. We'd become more involved in our community. I joined a support group for single parents at the local community center. It helped to talk with other people navigating parenthood alone, people who understood the unique challenges. Emma joined a youth mentorship program at the library where she tutored younger kids in reading. Watching her help a 6-year-old sound out words, I saw her confidence growing back. We made new friends, people who knew our whole story and supported us anyway. Slowly, we rebuilt a social circle based on trust and genuine care, rather than obligation or proximity. Stephanie became a constant presence in our lives. She visited at least twice a week, often bringing dinner or ingredients to cook together. Emma had permanently adopted her as Aunt Stephanie, and Stephanie clearly treasured the role. She'd found a new job at a better company after standing up to Brooke, and she said that act of courage had freed her from years of accepting toxic behavior. We'd saved each other in different ways. 4 months after the settlement, a letter arrived with my mother's handwriting on the envelope. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Emma saw me holding it and said I should read it. Her wisdom at 9 years old never ceased to amaze me. The letter was handwritten on floral stationery, tear stains visible on the paper. Linda's words were raw and apologetic. She wrote that they'd been wrong, that desperation had turned them into monsters. Frank's cancer was progressing rapidly. He was in hospice now, not expected to live more than a few weeks. They'd lost everything. Their house was in foreclosure, from legal fees and restitution payments. They were living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment, Linda working part-time at a grocery store to pay rent. Brooke had cut off all contact with them, bitter about how everything had ended. Linda said she understood if I never forgave them, but she wanted me to know they'd loved me. She wrote that she thought about me and Emma every day, missing us desperately. The letter ended with a request, not a demand. If possible, would I consider letting Emma visit Frank before he died? She wrote that she'd understand if the answer was no. I showed the letter to Marcus, to Dr. Patterson, to Stephanie. Everyone said the same thing, my choice, no wrong answer. But Emma had overheard part of my phone conversation with Marcus. She asked directly if Grandpa was dying. I confirmed that he was very sick. Emma said she wanted to say goodbye. She explained with a maturity beyond her years that bad people can still be family, that you can love someone and be angry at them at the same time. She said she didn't want to regret not saying goodbye. I realized my daughter was more forgiving than I was, and maybe that was okay. Maybe her ability to hold both love and anger, to offer grace without forgetting harm, was a strength I should learn from rather than discourage. 2 days later, I drove Emma to the hospice facility, where Frank was receiving end-of-life care. Linda waited in the hallway, keeping her distance as agreed. She looked old in a way I'd never noticed before, worn down by guilt and stress. We didn't speak. Frank's room was small but peaceful, windows overlooking a garden. He looked skeletal, the cancer having consumed most of his body weight. But when he saw Emma, his eyes filled with tears. Emma approached the bed and took his hand without hesitation. Frank whispered that he was sorry. Emma, with a generosity of spirit that made my throat tight, said she forgave him. She told him she loved him and would remember the good times, fishing trips, building snowmen, his terrible dad jokes. Frank looked at me over Emma's head. His voice was barely audible as he asked me to forgive him. I couldn't say I forgave him, not fully, not yet. But I said he should rest now, that Emma would be okay. It seemed like enough. He closed his eyes, looking peaceful for the first time since we'd arrived. Frank died 2 weeks later. I didn't attend the funeral but sent flowers with a card that read, "For the grandfather Emma remembers from before." Linda sent a handwritten thank you note respecting the boundaries I'd set. 6 months after sentencing, Brooke reached out through a supervised communication channel that Marcus had approved. She'd completed her court-ordered therapy and was working a retail job at a different store. She'd written a long letter taking full accountability for her actions. She wasn't asking for a relationship, just wanted to acknowledge the harm she'd caused. Her letter said therapy had helped her see how jealousy had poisoned her entire life, how she'd built a narrative where I was the lucky one and she was the victim, when really she'd made choices that held her back. She was working on being a better person, focused on her own growth rather than comparing herself to others. At the end, she wrote that she was proud of Emma's bravery and hoped someday Emma might know that. I thought for a long time before responding. Eventually, I wrote back acknowledging her apology and wishing her well in her recovery. I maintained firm boundaries, but said that forgiveness was possible over time, though trust had to be earned through sustained changed behavior. Maybe someday. One warm evening in late summer, Emma and I sat on the porch swing of our home, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Emma said she was glad we'd fought back. I agreed. Then she said something that struck me deeply. She said she was also glad we hadn't become mean like they had. I realized she'd learned the most important lesson from this whole nightmare. She'd seen that we could defend ourselves fiercely without becoming cruel, that we could pursue justice without losing our humanity, that winning didn't require destroying others beyond what was necessary to protect ourselves. Around this time, I started dating again. Very slowly, very cautiously. I'd met a woman named Rachel at the Single Parent Support Group. She was kind, patient, and understood my need to take things slow. Emma's opinion mattered most to me, and she liked Rachel, said she made me smile in a way I hadn't in a long time. We weren't rushing anything, just enjoying the possibility of something good. Emma and I decided to renovate the house, not to erase Julie's memory, but to add new ones. We painted Emma's room her favorite color, a bright teal that made the space feel fresh and cheerful. We built a reading nook together, installing shelves and hanging string lights. In the garden, we planted new flowers alongside the ones Julie had chosen, symbolizing how we could honor the past while building the future. The house transformed from a battleground we'd fought to keep into a true home again, filled with hope instead of fear. Through all of this, I learned lessons I never wanted to learn but needed to. Family isn't just about blood. Real family protects you, supports you, lifts you up. People who betray and manipulate you forfeit the right to that title, no matter what DNA you share. I learned that children are far more perceptive and brave than adults give them credit for. Emma had seen truth I'd been blind to. She'd protected us when I couldn't protect myself. Listening to our children, trusting their instincts, isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I learned that standing up to bullies is necessary, even when those bullies are family, especially when they're family, because that betrayal cuts deepest and sets the most dangerous precedent. If I'd surrendered to keep peace, I'd have taught Emma that abuse is acceptable if it comes from people who claim to love you. I learned that justice and mercy aren't opposites. We'd pursued justice relentlessly, but we'd also shown mercy at the end. We didn't seek maximum punishment, didn't try to destroy them beyond what was necessary to protect ourselves and hold them accountable. That balance mattered. 1 year after the court case, we celebrated Emma's 10th birthday with a party at our house. It was a small gathering. Her close friends from school, Stephanie, Rachel, some neighbors who'd supported us, members from my support group. No family. But the house was full of people who'd chosen to love us, and that meant everything. Emma made a wish as she blew out her candles. Later, when everyone had left and we were cleaning up, she told me what she'd wished for. She'd wished for us to always be safe and happy. I hugged her and said that wish had already come true. Looking around our home that evening, cluttered with birthday decorations and filled with the residue of laughter, I realized she was right. This was family now. Chosen, earned, real. We'd survived something that should have destroyed us. We'd fought back and won. But more importantly, we'd kept our humanity intact. We'd protected what mattered without becoming the monsters who'd attacked us. The tablet Emma had used to record those videos sat in a place of honor on our bookshelf. Sometimes she'd pick it up and say it saved us. I always corrected her. She'd saved us. Her courage, her intelligence, her refusal to be helpless. The tablet was just a tool. Emma was the hero. She'd always respond the same way. We saved each other, Daddy. And she was right about that too. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, exhausted and happy from her birthday celebration, she asked me to tell her again about when Mommy first saw this house. I settled into the chair beside her bed and began the story Julie had told so many times about walking through the front door and just knowing this was meant to be our home. Emma's eyes grew heavy as I spoke, her breathing evening out into sleep. I watched her peaceful face and felt overwhelming gratitude. We'd faced the worst kind of betrayal and come through it stronger. This house was ours, truly and completely. Our family, though smaller and different than I'd once imagined, was solid and real. The path forward was clear. We'd keep building this life we'd fought so hard to protect. We'd honor Julie's memory while making new memories. We'd surround ourselves with people who'd earned our trust. We'd teach through example that boundaries matter, that defending yourself is necessary, that forgiveness is a choice rather than an obligation. Most importantly, we'd remember that home isn't just a building with walls and a roof. Home is where you're safe, where you're loved, where you can be vulnerable without fear of that vulnerability being weaponized against you. We'd found our way home. Not just to this house, but to a life where integrity mattered more than blood ties, where chosen family could be stronger than biological family, where a father and daughter could face down betrayal and emerge not just intact but genuinely happy. I turned off Emma's light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, the ordinary complications of raising a child and building a career and navigating relationships. But we'd face it together, father and daughter, survivors who'd learned that love backed by courage is stronger than manipulation backed by malice. Before I share my final thoughts, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who betrayed your trust? How did you find the balance between protecting yourself and maintaining your own integrity? I'd love to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if Emma's courage inspired you, or if you've faced similar battles with people who should have protected you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them, who might need to know they're not alone in facing family betrayal. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that standing up for yourself isn't cruelty, it's necessity. That children can be wiser than we expect. That homes are worth fighting for. That families are built through loyalty and love, not just DNA. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for allowing me to share the hardest chapter of my life and the lessons we learned from surviving it. I hope that whatever battles you're facing, you find the courage to fight back, the wisdom to know when mercy matters, and the strength to build a life filled with people who truly love you. May you always have the courage to protect what matters most, and may your home always be your sanctuary rather than your battlefield.